Hi, my name is Rick Noel, and welcome to this episode of Artemis, which is an application that I wrote that helps you find photos quickly on your computer. In this episode, we're going to talk about settings. And in settings, you'll be able to change the look and feel of Artemis and some of its behavior. I'm going to jump right into the live demo by sharing my screen. And those of you who have seen any of the videos in this series, you're now familiar with this UI. We've got our menu system here and our results panel where the matching photos or any query go. So to change any settings in Artemis, we go to the edit menu and select settings. Now the settings are broken down into three groups of settings indicated by the tabs here. The first of which is the general settings. And the first general setting is the units. And this can be either metric or imperial, and that will control the format of the display of some numbers. And in one case, there's a command where Artemis will allow you to search for photographs that are shot a certain distance away from where a selected photograph was taken. And so when it prompts for that distance, if you have imperial units, it will prompt you for miles, and if it's metric, it'll prompt you for kilometers. Next is the GPS format, and this controls the display format of GPS coordinates. And you have three choices. There's decimal, where GPS coordinates will be two numbers, a latitude and a longitude. Next, you can choose degrees, minutes, seconds. And lastly, if you're somebody who's in the military or a survey or government employee, you may be familiar with Universal Transverse Mercator, or UTM, and you can use that as the display format for locations. Next is the max search history, and that the max results, which defaults to 500, and that is the maximum number of photographs that I will show in the results panel initially when you do a search query. And as you may be familiar, if you've watched the other videos on this, if there are more search results to get, you can click on this right arrow to get the next chunk of results into the results panel. And this right arrow with the vertical bar will show the remaining matching photographs, no matter how many are left. Next is the max search history, and that's set at 10. And so if we go to the search button here, you'll see that there's a section of search history. So if I go and enter search queries here in the search bar, for example, I'll just quickly get photos with me in them, and then maybe get some with my wife and I in them. So I've executed two searches now, and if we open up the search button here, you'll see under the search history those two search queries. And if you want to re-execute one, you simply select it and it'll run that query again. So the setting, the max search history setting in the settings dialog is controlling how many of these most recent searches you want me to save. And I said the default is 10. Once you exceed what that limit is, I'll simply remove the oldest search item from this list and insert the newest search at the top. Next is the slideshow interval, and that's how many seconds I display each photograph in the slideshow when it's in an auto run mode. Next is the folders to skip during sync. When you install Artemis, you point it to a root folder that contains all of your photographs that you want Artemis to process and be aware of. But there may be some folders in that folder structure that you don't want Artemis to look at or to process. And to add those folders, you simply click on this plus icon and it brings up a file dialog of your root directory that contains your photos, and you simply select the directories that you want to exclude and hit the open button, and that will add them to this list. And whenever Artemis does a sync to synchronize what's on the hard disk to what's in its database, it will ignore those directories. Next is the look and feel, and that allows you to, as you can imagine, change the look and feel of Artemis. There are several of them to choose from here. Right now, I have the flat white look and feel. And let's say, for example, I choose flat dark. You'll notice that now all the UI is in various shades of gray. I'm going to flip that back to flat white because some people will find that a little more difficult to read for the purposes of the demo. Next is a theme, and this is a subsetting of the look and feel. Some look and feel values will have themes associated with them. Generally, the themes will be things like color variations of the look and feel or font variations. So you can choose, for example, maybe a small, medium, or large font version of a look and feel. And so if you pick a look and feel that does have themes, you'll be able to choose those themes here. Next is disable tooltips. If you've seen any of the other videos on Artemis, as you see, if I highlight over the thumbnails in any of the result set photos, you get a fairly large tooltip here, and you may find this kind of distracting as you're working with the application. So if you do, you can turn off tooltips by going to the setting and choosing disable tooltips. And now if I hit OK, you'll see if I hold them all still over the thumbnail, no more tooltips. Next is the save where I left off on exit and restore on startup. So let's say, for example, that I was running a fairly complicated search query here. Maybe I'm looking at the good photos that were shot in the fall, and they were taken at Arches, and I want to restrict it to the files that are JPEG files. So I've got my set of files, and I'm working through this set of files. Maybe I'm rating them, changing the location, or tagging people in them, and I'm working my way down the list. And let's say that I finish up with this photo here. Now, I want to quit for the day. I could write down the search query here so I can execute it, re-enter it, and execute it when I start Artemis up again. And I can also write down the name of the file that I left off with so that I can continue on. But I can let Artemis do that for me by going to the settings and choosing the save where I left off and exit on restore on startup, excuse me. So if I choose that, now if I exit Artemis, let's say I come back the next day and I want to fire Artemis back up again, I can do that. And when Artemis comes up, you'll notice that it executed the query and it found the photograph that I had selected and scrolled down to where that photo was and selected it for me. So now I know I can continue along with the next photograph, doing my tagging or rating or whatever. Okay, next is the commands tab. And this is where user commands are established. There are two URLs that I'll talk about quickly first. This first setting, locate on map URL, if you watch the video on editing in Artemis, you'll know that one of the commands available is when you select a photograph that has a location, you can choose locate on map, and that will bring up a browser and show a map where that photo was taken. And by default, I use Google Maps to do that. And when I'm specifying the location to display in the map, that you'll notice that there's a 0 and a 1 in curly braces, and those represent the latitude and longitude, respectively, of the photograph's location. So if you wanted to, for example, have Artemis bring up a different mapping technology like MapQuest, you'd simply enter in the URL for the MapQuest map and just substitute in the 0 and 1 in curly braces for the latitude and longitude. And when you execute the locate on map command, you'll get MapQuest instead of Google, for example. The internal map URL is very similar. It works exactly the same, only this is the URL that is used internally in the mapping panel that is displayed in the bottom right of Artemis. And so if you wanted to change what map get displayed there, you can change it in this setting here and bring up MapQuest maps there instead of Google. Next is the user command section. And as I talked about in a previous video, when you have a photo selected in the edit menu, you can open the photograph, which will bring up a viewer of it. You can also edit the photograph, and that brings up the photograph in a system default editor, which on Microsoft is Microsoft Paint. Not a particularly interesting editor for editing photographs, so I allow you to create your own menu commands in that edit menu so that you can create a menu command to, for example, invoke Photoshop or Lightroom to edit your photo instead. So to do that, we go to the settings dialog, and the user commands are. And next to the user commands title here is a plus icon. When you click that, that adds a handful of fields that will fill in that define our new menu item. The first field we have to fill in is an internal name, and by convention I use CMD underscore and whatever the command is. And this just has to be, it can be any string you want, it just has to be a string that's unique from the other menu command so I can differentiate your menu item from the existing ones. So I'm going to create a menu command that's going to bring up Luminar, which is my editor of choice for editing photographs. So I'm going to use CMD Luminar as my internal name. Then I specified the menu text, and that's simply going to be the text that will appear in the menu. So I'm going to say edit with Luminar. Next is the menu tooltip. And so when you open up the menu, if you hover the mouse over the menu item, then a tooltip will be issued, which will give the user a bit more of a descriptive text on what's going to happen when they choose your command. So I'll say edit the selected photo with Luminar 4. Next is the selection mode. And you have a handful of choices here. The two most important ones are single and multiple. This basically tells Artemis when your menu item should be enabled. And you determine that by letting Artemis know how many photos your application that you're going to invoke can handle at one time. Now, Luminar, we're going to edit one photo at a time, so I'm going to pick single. And let's say I was creating a menu command here, and I wanted it to invoke my favorite HDR editor, where you want to give the editor a bracketed set of photographs to build the HDR image, in which case you choose multiple. So we're going to stick with single for Luminar here. The next is the menu mnemonic. And so if users open up the menu with the keyboard, this is a letter that they can type to jump immediately to your menu item so that they can execute it more quickly and efficiently. I'm going to choose L for Luminar. And then lastly is the application to launch when they select your menu item. So we're going to click on the Find App button. And I know that in Windows, applications are under Program Files. And Luminar is written by Skylum, so it's in the Skylum folder. There's my Luminar 4. And there's the Luminar 4 executable that I want to execute. So I click on the Open button to fill that in, and that's it. That's all we needed to do to create our menu item. So now I'll hit OK. And as you can see, I've got a photograph selected here. And when I go to the Edit menu, either here, and you'll see there's my menu item here. If I hover over it, oh, sorry about that. I have disabled my tooltips. If I hover over my menu item, you then see the tooltip that I entered. So you can execute the command from the edit menu there or from the context menu here, either way. But when I choose my command to execute, Artemis is going to launch Luminar, and it's going to pass that selected photo to be edited. And one of the big complaints I have about Luminar and some of the other major photo editing applications are that they take a very long time to come up, which is a bit frustrating. Luminar takes about maybe 12 to 15 seconds on my computer, which is a bit much, but Anyway, as you can see, it brings up the photograph for me to edit, and now I can edit the photograph in my favorite editor rather than the default system editor, which has very minimum functionality. Okay, and just to reinforce our selection mode that we set in the menu command, since Luminar doesn't edit multiple photos at the same time, if I had more than one photo selected and I bring up the menu, you'll see that it disables my Edit with Luminar menu command. Okay, next. That's it for the menu commands. And next is the email privacy tab. Now we talked about the email address functionality here and deleting and registering emails in a previous video. But basically, this setting here will list all the registered emails that Artemis knows about, the ones that you've registered with Artemis. And so you can pick an email that you want to use when you're emailing photographs to somebody else. I can just pick one, and once we establish this in the settings, anytime you choose the email command, it will use that email. And the next section here, this is the set of privacy data that will be removed from photographs that you email to somebody, or be removed when they're zipped up if you're going to be sharing that zip file with friends. So when you execute the email command or the zip file command, it prompts you for these settings, so you can select whichever ones you want. But here in the settings, if you always want to clear particular settings, then you can simply select the ones you always want to clear and then hit OK. And so when you bring up the email command, let's do that here, for example, that warning message, you'll see that the ones that we selected in the settings are already selected for us. So you don't have to check these every time you want to send an email or every time you want to create a zip file with photos. And that is it for the settings in Artemis. Hopefully you found this interesting. And if you have an interest in learning more about Artemis, you can go to my webpage specified here. And on that page, you'll see links to the other videos in the series. And thank you for watching.